Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbore with your nightly review for Wednesday, January 16th. It's being taped about 4:02 p.m. Few people waiting for eBay's earnings. President Obama thought his second term would be all about how to spend our children's money. And I've been saying for years that at some point foreign policy will dominate, dragging him kicking and screaming to focus on growing threats. Remember when we were told Al-Qaeda was extinguished? That was a lie. Today in the stock market, the Dow Jones fell 26 points to 13,509. Boeing accounted for half the loss. I'll get to that in a moment. S&P 500 was flat. NASDAQ was up 0.2% to 3117, owing to Apple's reversal. It was up $20 today. Goldman Sachs reported net income of $2.83 billion and its shares rallied smartly. JP Morgan Chase reported solid earnings, but CEO Jamie Dimon had his pay cut from $23 million to $11.5 million. Just awful, as he had to take responsibility for the trading losses of the London whale, some $6.2 billion worth. There was some good news on industrial production for December. It was solid, especially the manufacturing component. Gold closed at $16.80, oil $94. And the 10-year Treasury at 1.82%. The Consumer Price Index for December came out. It was unchanged. Ex-food and energy up 0.1. For 2012, the CPI was up just 1.3, up 1.9% on the core. You know, I focus on the bull-bear sentiment readings, at least I track that, and I showed you the other day how I've tracked it for 23 years. Well, it's released early Wednesday mornings, and today the new bull-bear spread is 53.2 bulls, 22.3 bears. So that's a spread of over 30, and 30 traditionally is a danger level. Just keep that in mind. If you have some profits, you might want to take a little off the table. The World Bank estimates that the global economy grew just 2.3% in 2012. It sees only 2.4% growth in 2013, 3.1% in 2014, 3.3% in 2015, but these things are subject to major change. Developed countries like the US, Japan, and Germany had growth of only 1.3% in 2012. Developed countries should gradually grow to 2.3% by 2015, which is still far from great. The Eurozone will continue to contract in 2013 and maybe grow to 1.4% or to a 1.4% rate by 2015. Demand for new cars in the European Union fell to the lowest level in 17 years, down 8.2% in 2012 and set to drop further this year. For December, car sales, or as they call it, car registrations, were down 16%. But I thought the worst was over. Declining population in the wealthier countries in the EU is not helping, plus cars are just better made these days, and Europe has a relatively young fleet of vehicles, about 8.4 years, versus the US's 11 years, which bodes well for our auto industry. course, the European car manufacturers have major overcapacity issues, and Renault announced it would cut 7,500 jobs in France by 2016. Last month, sales for Renault fell 27% in France, 20% for the year. Ford's sales in Europe fell 27% in December. GM's also dropped 27% last month over year earlier figures. The German government today cut its own GDP forecast for 2013 to 0.4% from a previous forecast of up 1%. So that's in line with yesterday's release by the Statistics Office I told you about. German government expects growth to accelerate to 1.6% in 2014. Meanwhile, the rising euro against the dollar to the highest level in almost 11 months is hurting exports at the worst possible time. Back to the U.S., the Federal Reserve's Beige Book on Economic Activity, Regional Activity, for December was just released. Economic activity has expanded since the previous Beige Book report, with all 12 districts characterizing the pace of growth as either modest or moderate. The Fed report was prepared for the January 29-30 meeting, and because it's talking about modest or moderate growth, some of the policymakers may want to change that $85 billion in monthly bond purchase program. There was some good news separately. Net buying of long-term U.S. stocks, bonds, and other financial assets totaled $52.3 billion during the month of November, which is twice as much as forecast, and after net sales of just $1 billion in October. Okay, Japan Airlines and All Nippon Airways grounded their Boeing 787 Dreamliner aircraft for inspection after one of the Dreamliners made an emergency landing in western Japan on Wednesday. It was the fourth significant safety scare in just over a week. This particular Dreamliner aircraft, operated by ANA, made the emergency landing amid reports of smoke in the cabin. Instruments in the cockpit indicated a battery malfunction. Not the first time, and the pilot noticed a strange smell. The Japan Transport Safety Board launched an investigation saying it considered the latest problem with the Dreamliner a serious incident that could lead to an accident. Boeing still has a backlog of more than 800 orders for the model. Boeing shares were down about, they were down about 250 today. Turning to overseas, forgot to mention, this is a great movie. If you can't see it, it's the Battle of Algiers in the 1950s, Algeria's battle for independence from the French. Be a good movie to get for today. Ironically, the Algerians are helping the French. In Mali. So we start there. French troops began to move north to face the Islamists in direct combat for the first time. There was fighting today. I've not heard or read of any details yet. Diaboli, a town of 35,000 where Al-Qaeda is entrenched, is the first target. It's an incredibly dangerous situation. The terrorists are hiding in mud-walled neighborhoods, using civilians as human shields. Residents aren't allowed to leave. African troops have yet to arrive. They were to be the ones leading the offensive, so the French felt they had to act now or the capital would shortly be under attack. Just 250 miles away, and again, this is the desert, and you can cover that in just a couple hours. Meanwhile, the United States is balking over its support for the French because the rebels don't pose a direct threat to us. The White House doesn't want to be pulled into a new conflict. Yet the French thought they had our support. Defense Secretary Panetta has called French action critical to the war against Al-Qaeda, but it turns out he hasn't committed the U.S. to do anything. The stories just yesterday that I passed on, and I just took my best reading of like 15 different sources that I plowed through, were that we would provide logistical support and probably drones for surveillance, but it's not clear we'll even do that. Now, my adage is wait 24 hours, but for today, Washington better not look to Paris for help anytime soon. I mean, we must do the minimum here. A senior White House official told the Wall Street Journal, quote, "A little time to make the right decisions is warranted. People need to take a breath." Take a breath? If the French hadn't acted, the Islamists probably would have overrun the Malian capital of Bamako by now. And Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb would have its safe haven from which to launch attacks elsewhere. But I mentioned on Monday that the Islamists threatened there would be reprisals for France's action, and overnight in Algeria, terrorists affiliated with Al-Qaeda attacked a gas facility at Aminas, which is an area that has 50 oil and natural gas fields. It appears at least 2 were killed, one a British national, the other reportedly from France. That's according to the BBC. Several have been taken hostage, including an unknown number of Americans. I've heard a number, I'm not going to state it. Nationals from Britain, Ireland, Japan, Norway, and the U.S. at least are being held hostage right now, as far as we know. Algeria had been allowing French aircraft to use its airspace, and Algeria, importantly, had closed its border with Mali to try and help keep Al-Qaeda out of Mali. A lot of Al-Qaeda members are Algerians. The Algerian army has surrounded this facility at Aminas, and that's where we stand today. In Syria, 2 massive blasts at Aleppo University killed at least 87. The opposition and government blame each other. The toll will probably be higher because medics were collecting unidentified body parts. I have to admit, I figured the school had been closed, but it seems it was about the only safe haven in Aleppo, and it was an area controlled by the government. There was a separate bombing in Idlib, Syria today that killed over 20. And there was a wave of bombings in Iraq that killed at least 24 in a new round of ethnic clashes. The White House denounced remarks by Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi, specifically remarks that surfaced on a video from an interview in September of 2010. This story has been out there. I've reported on it. Why the White House is just now bringing it up is a little mystifying, but in the video, Morsi, then a senior Muslim Brotherhood official, told the interviewer from a Lebanon-based channel, quote, either you accept the Zionists and everything they want, or else it is war. This is what these occupiers of the land of Palestine know. These bloodsuckers who attack the Palestinians, these warmongers, the descendants of apes and pigs. Mr. Morsi dismissed negotiations between Israel and Palestine as a waste of time and called the Palestinian Authority a creation of the Zionist and American enemies for the sole purpose of opposing the will of the Palestinian people and its interest. The White House said President Morsi should make clear that he respects people of all faiths and that this type of rhetoric is not acceptable or productive in a democratic Egypt. Of course, that's true. Well, be glad you weren't Russia's top mafia boss, Aslan Usoyan, a Georgian who goes by the nickname Grandpa Kassan, was exiting his restaurant in the center of Moscow today when an assassin opened fire with a rifle from the roof of a building across the street and felled the man with a shot to the head. So much for Russia's mafia boss. Well, that's all for tonight. I'll be back with you tomorrow, Thursday. Keep the men and women of our armed forces in your thoughts and prayers. We pray for the French soldiers. There are going to be casualties in this operation. It's not going to be pretty. We desperately need the French to be successful. And our thoughts and prayers now go out to those being held hostage in Algeria. Take care.